Love Medicine, an overview. Keys to the novel. A novel is a work of fiction that differs from a short story and a novella in that it is much longer. Short stories may be 2 to 40 pages long, novellas 75 to 110 pages. Novels may be anywhere from 150 to 1250 pages in length. There may be a few that are longer than that. 2. All of the elements of fiction you have learned about the short story also apply to the novel. Plot, character, setting, and point of view, for example. Of course, obviously, once you start to hit 150 pages, the novel is considerably more complex in nature than the short story. Number 3, the novel is the oldest fictional genre. It originates with the late 17th century. Number 4, the novel was derived from the 17th century popular non-fiction genres that predate it. And this is why the novel continues to share characteristics with non-fiction. For example, the novel was inspired by treatises in the fields of science, philosophy, and ethics, and I left out politics, but there you go, as well as travel writing and true crime. Non-fiction books in all of these areas were popular reading in the late 17th century, and so the novel is inspired by these types of writing, and that is what is the base for the popularity of the novel, and why I suppose you might say the novel seems to focus throughout the many eras. There always seems to be a need for a sense of reality in some aspect, even if it's just realistically drawn characters. Love Medicine is the story of a Native American family. Open your novel to the family pedigree at the front of the book. You will notice that in the center, right where the pages meet, are June, Jerry, and Lipshaw. Which is also telling you not only are these three kind of in the center of the pedigree, but they're also very much at the heart of the book, even though these three characters do very little, if any, talking throughout the novel. They're mostly talked about, interestingly enough. So you may gather from that, this novel is going to have a lot of fun with point of view. The grandparents that we learn about here, we learn that Rush's bear, also known as Margaret, marries Cashpaw. Rush's bear has 2 children with Cashpaw, Eli and Nectar, and Nectar marries Marie Lazar. Okay. Eli raises June Morrissey, but June Morrissey is not actually Eli's child. Okay. And actually, Eli does not raise her for very long. She is mostly raised by Marie Lazar. The children of Nectar, Cashpaw, and Marie Lazar include Gordy Cashpaw, Zelda Cashpaw, and these other 3 who don't really, well, Aurelia is named, but Eugene and Patsy, they hardly come up. They're too far out over there. Zelda Cashpaw marries Swede Johnson, also doesn't play much of a role in the novel, but their child, Albertine, plays an important role of narrating scenes. June and Gordy have a child named King. King marries a blonde young woman, and they have a child named King Jr., also known as Howard. June Morrissey has a liaison with Jerry Nanapush, and June and Jerry's child is named Lipshaw Morrissey. He is adopted also by Nectar and Marie. I say liaison because, of course, June is married to Gordy, and it would seem quite unhappily. You'll see what I mean as you start reading. Jerry is the child, got to go clear over to the left here. Jerry is the child of Moses Pillager and Lulu Nanapush Lamartine. So the figures who do most of the talking in this novel are actually Lulu Nanapush Lamartine and Marie Lazar, so they're on opposite ends over there, and Nectar Cashpaw. Those three characters are central, if you like, because they talk a lot. And you'll find that the sort of nexus between these three is a bit of a love triangle. Nectar, as a teenager, is in love with Lulu and is planning to ask her something, ask her out, ask her for a date, ask her to marry him. He just knows that she's the one. And then enter Marie Lazar, and Nectar's entire world changes. Okay, so, but you will learn, you will read. Okay, so you can see the legend in the bottom. You will note that the double line, broken line, is a traditional Ojibwe marriage. What is Ojibwe? Ojibwe is a Native American tribe, and it is in fact the Native American tribe that our author Louise Erdrich belongs to on her mother's side. The ... dots we see are sexual affairs or liaisons. The double broken lines with the dots in the middle are Catholic marriage. So we can see, even just by looking at this marriage, even looking at this legend, the influence of colonialism and Catholicism on the Native American people. Anyway, okay, so you can see what is there. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, point of view changes in this novel from chapter to chapter, and in fact the first chapter is called The World's Greatest Fisherman, and you can see that all of the chapters have the chapter title. Right below the chapter title is the year, right? And what that is giving you is telling you that the events that are taking place in this chapter take place in 1981. You see 1981 in parentheses there. And you don't see a name below that. So what that means is that this portion of the first chapter, the World's Greatest Fisherman, is being told by a third-person narrator. It's not a participant in the book. And this this third-person narrator is what we call, it's third-person limited, because this narrator only knows what June knows. This narrator does not know what Andy knows or what anybody else knows who's being talked about. Now, this is called Section 1 because the World's Greatest Fisherman, Section 1, is told in the third person, and it is told about the events, actually, of June's last day on Earth. And then Part 2 is the wake for June, and it says below number 2, Albertine Johnson, and this tells you that Albertine is telling the story. So Albertine is a first-person narrator. She is a participant, but Albertine, mostly when Albertine is telling us the story, she's talking a whole lot about other people. Albertine is a fairly trustworthy observer of others, and so that's how we come to expect what she's going to tell us. It's not terribly biased. It's not intimately involved, really. I mean, she tells us what she thinks, but Albertine is fairly straight up. Our next chapters are called Saint Marie and Wild Geese, and you'll notice that both of these chapters take place in 1934, and 1934 is when Marie Lazar, it's her maiden name, meets or runs into Nectar Cashpaw. So, the point of view in Saint Marie is Marie Lazar. The point of view in Wild Geese is Nectar Cashpaw. And you can start to see in these chapters how point of view is working, because these are very strongly, Marie and Nectar are strong personalities. They take a central role. They are absolutely participants in their own story. And Anyway. And that's how a lot of the book works, actually. We'll just keep going through. Point of view in the island and the beads. The island is told by Lulu Nanapush. Lulu, again, the lady that Nectar was always in love with but didn't marry. She tells her own story here. She has a very strong point of view. She has a very poetic way of speaking. Lulu is very strongly associated with nature, with Native American values. She's very much on the inside, less affected or influenced by colonial culture. She rejects it and wants to stay put, stay where she is, and keep what she has, and be successful in that. The Beads. Okay, The Beads takes place in 1948, and this is the setting for this, the events that are going on. Marie Cashpaw, you can see her name is Cashpaw. She has already married Nectar by 1948, and they have quite a collection of children. Marie Cashpaw not only has many of her own children with Nectar, but she's also kind of the local adopter. And this is the story of when the Lazars, or the Morrisseys rather, bring June to Marie to ask Marie to raise her. So you can enjoy that story. Next we have the stories Lulu's Boys and The Plunge of the Brave. Lulu's Boys, this takes place in 1957. It does not have a name here. It's told in the third person, but the third person narrator is kind of limited, but it's not what you might think. It's not entirely Lulu's point of view. It's actually much more Henry Lamartine's point of view. Well, actually not Henry, Beverly, excuse me. It's Beverly Lamartine's point of view in large part, but it's not really told by him. So what we gather when we read this is what is Beverly thinking about what's going on. But in this particular chapter, we are not told what Lulu is thinking, which becomes very interesting later, because as Lulu remembers what happens here later, she has a different idea than what Beverly is sharing here, and so does Nectar. And that continues to happen through the book, that you get different points of view, and people remembering things differently, and people having different impressions of conversations and what they meant. Okay, so Lulu's Boys is a lot about Beverly Lamartine and his encounter with Lulu and the boys, her own boys, they're her own offspring. And Plunge of the Brave, 1957, is the same year, and this is Nectar Cashpaw's point of view. And Plunge of the Brave refers to the fact that Nectar Cashpaw looks extremely handsome, first of all, to everyone. And his looks are very much appreciated, not only among natives, but also outside the tribe by the whites, because Nectar looks like that carved statue with those cheekbones. And so the Plunge of the Brave is actually, in the story, it's a famous painting that Nectar was talked into posing for, and he tells that story. So it's about a little bit about Nectar's identity, who he is, how he is finding himself, what kinds of encounters he has in the white world as he travels as a young man, and what he learns about himself, and how he does not very much appreciate the fact that in the white world, to a very great degree, what is appreciated is the Indian that looks stoic and is therefore silent, and so not protesting. And also, of course, the self-sacrificing native who is willing to give up his life for the good, actually, of the colonial society. Nothing quite says America is great like Indians who are willing to give up their lives for the benefit of the white people. Anyway, much political background behind that. I allow you to observe that for yourself.